Hello and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. The release of India's religious census, the population of India broken down by religion, has led to much sound and fury. The big picture, from 2001 to 2011, the proportion of Hindu population of India has fallen very slightly. The proportion is now just below 80%. In the same time, the Muslim growth rate has risen by 0.8%. Other interesting figures that have emerged is that the percentage of population of Christians has remained virtually the same. Sikhs and Buddhists have fallen slightly. Why then do we see so many alarmist headlines? What really are the big ideas that have emerged from the census? Joining me tonight, we have a very interesting panel. With me is Vice Chancellor Zamiruddin Shah of the Aligarh Muslim University. I'm also joined by Professor Dipankar Gupta, Director of the Center for Public Affairs and Critical Theory. I'm also joined by two MPs from the Rajya Sabha, Chandan Mitra of the BJP and Shankar Aiyar of the Congress. Chandan Mitra, I referred to alarmist headlines in my introduction, and it's been interesting that everyone has interpreted this data in perhaps what their ideological viewpoint is. Interestingly, this week the RSS has met with top ministers. The religious census has also been discussed. We saw a recent organizer editorial which made the point that ignoring a matter of national concern is something that seculars may do, but this is something the government and government policy needs to address. Do you agree?
Well, no, I don't think government and government policy can address the issue of the rate of growth of the population. But yes, I think the one place which is a matter of some concern, that while the governments move for successive governments have tried to control the population of India, and we have seen that while it has been successful to a large extent with some communities, with some other communities, it has not met with so much success. So I think this is something that cannot be avoided anymore. We have to openly discuss that what is going on, and to what extent we need to propagate family planning measures with those sections of the population which have not been very enthusiastic about it so far.
Do you think that facts are being interpreted through an ideological viewpoint? Like, for instance, when the RSS is bringing this up as a matter of concern as it meets with top ministers, when you've had other RSS leaders make the point that this is an alarm bell, that the country needs to wake up. Is it being interpreted in a way to forward a political agenda?
Firstly, I don't know where you got this. I don't think RSS has formally commented on this or demanded government action or government to step in.
No, Rakesh Singh of RSS has said it's an alarm bell, it must be addressed. The organizer editorial has asked for this.
Well, I don't know whether it's being discussed in a ministerial meeting, but it is something which has been in the media, it has been in the headlines. So it's only natural that why in the RSS, I would not be surprised if the CPM also took note of it. So because census figures are meant to be noted and lessons to be drawn from there. So it is natural that people will interpret the figures according to their kind of perception and their worldview, and I think there is nothing wrong with that. In a democracy, that is only natural and obvious. And I told you right at the outset that the basic thing is that the rate of growth of certain sections of the population has been higher than those of the others. Now, what does this mean, and whether this is good for the country, not so good for the country, everything needs to be taken as a whole. Now, for instance, in China, the population policy is applied quite strictly across the board, irrespective of communities. But I think in India, we have been a little, and successive governments have been hesitant to apply a uniform policy for all, and this is something that perhaps needs to be looked at.
I'm going to bring in General Shah on this as a Vice Chancellor now. Your perspective on this, sir, because I think, again, when we look at this data more closely, interesting facts have been that the socio-economic factors have often been a key indicator as well. For instance, socio-economically, we've seen that the growth rate of Muslims in Kerala is much less than, say, the growth rate of even Hindus in Uttar Pradesh or Bihar. So it's interesting, the socio-economic impact as well. But would you come in with your perspective?
Yes, I have done my homework. Firstly, I'd like to convey greetings from Aligarh Muslim University, the second best university of the country by Times Higher Education London. Certainly in the last decade, the Muslim population has increased from 14.2% to 13.4%, and the Hindus have fallen below the psychological barrier of 80%. So that's certainly a psychological factor. But let me try and explain that or let me say that certainly this growth rate is a cause of concern for people who don't know the facts. And let me put the facts plainly before you. Firstly, I would like to say statistics can be projected in the manner in which suits the individual projecting it. I can twist statistics any way I like. I haven't in this case, and I'll show you. It is all a matter of perception. When the figures were revealed, the Hindu declared Muslim growth rate slows. It certainly has. I'm not denying that. Times of India was more alarmist. It says Hindus' number shrinks, Muslim numbers grow. It certainly drums up fear of minorities swamping a majority, which is impossible, and I'll tell you later why. There's been feverish demographic projections which have generated more heat than light. Indeed, Muslim growth rates are higher than the corresponding figures of Hindu communities. I'll tell you the reason why. Firstly, the Muslims have a better male-female ratio. Amongst Muslims, it is 950 females to 1,000. Amongst Hindus, it is 925 to 1,000. Now, we all know that this is the result of self-determination, sex determination tests. I'm certain about it. And measures have been put to stop it. But it's one of the facts. Secondly is Muslim women have higher fertility rates. They were less educated, they remained at home, so they had higher fertility rates. Lower child mortality. Let me tell you, in Muslim households, the girl child is looked as well after as the boy child. There's no discrimination. And also, the statistics show that Muslims have a higher life expectancy than Hindus, for whatever reason. Between 2001 to 2011, I'll just show you a slide which will show what it is like. See, if you see the Muslim growth rate, it is certainly less than the Hindus and Christians, but it is slightly less than the uneducated and the impoverished. So the growth rate really depends on your economic situation, and unfortunately the economic situation of Muslims is pretty poor.
In fact, I think an interesting point made by another commentator was that along with this, why is it that the economic indicators have not been released along with the religious census breakup? And I just want to bring in Mani Shankar Aiyar on how you can interpret facts, and I made that point whether it's a political agenda. Let me ask the other aspect of political agenda, that why did the UPA keep these facts silent for so long, that as this is a matter of academic interest, it's a census which has been done, why hide it? Isn't it better to have facts out at the open, to discuss it, to come to some kind of consensus perhaps, and even look at the point raised that the sex ratio is better in a certain community than in another community, the issue about the Christian growth rate being static. These are all interesting facts which the country should know in a democracy. Why did the UPA hide it?
I have no idea why the UPA government didn't release them.
Did you support that?
I wish it had.
You wish it had, okay.
I wish it had, and I wish the present government would release the caste figures. So I don't think we should treat these community and caste figures as if they are tinder material, you know, which is going to sort of explode. The fact of the matter is that, number one, the growth rate of India's population has been declining. That's the really important point to note. Secondly, I don't think it is your community that determines your fertility or your longevity. And therefore, to attribute it to the fact that you belong to a Muslim community or a Hindu community is, I think, inappropriate. Thirdly, the Hindus are a number of communities. They are not one single community. And inter-se differences between castes, between regions, between the scheduled tribes and the scheduled castes and the other castes, there are so many factors that go into it that for anyone to look at all these figures simply from a single perspective doesn't seem to me to make any sense. If there is something on which we should be delighted, it is the extraordinarily rapid decline in the growth rate of the Muslim population. That is the single biggest important document to give, because if you looked at the Indian population from 1921 onwards, the first reason for a decline in population growth is that death rates fall. And among the poor, among the Muslim poor, I think death rates have fallen. And that was what accounted for the big boom in the Muslim population, I think between 81 and 91. But since then, there's not been a further drop. At the same time, there has been a drop in the birth rates. And therefore, the conclusion I come to is that Muslims are like all of us. And if the socio-economic conditions, which are the most effective condom of all, if the socio-economic conditions of the Muslims is improved, then we are going to have a stabilization of the Muslim population along with the rest of our population. And the generally accepted date on which our population as a whole will stabilize is about 30 years from now, around the time of our centenary of the of Indian independence.
I made that point about alarmist headlines, and you were reported as having said that these 2 or 3 decimal points that that they may be planning to do something over this can be used for communal agenda. You don't feel a statement like that is alarmist too?
Not at all, because there are people in India who are waiting to promote their communal agenda, and therefore I wanted to warn people like those who run the Organizer magazine that please don't use it in a communal way. But the organizers' comment on my comment shows that they do have a communal agenda.
The Professor Dipankar Gupta, if you could come in, the interesting aspect that perhaps look at India's population overall, and I just had a dialogue last week in fact on how we are now heading to be the world's most populous country and demographic dividend or disaster. In this nitty-gritty perhaps of looking at, when we look at something so minutely, we ignore the larger picture completely. Mr. Aiyar, Gen Zamiruddin Shah has pointed out the fact of the Muslim growth rate falling dramatically. What are the other big pictures you see? Because again, if you do actually analyze, what is interesting is the change in demography or the change in population perhaps in Assam and West Bengal. Eastern India, I think, has seen quite a rapid change. Are these factors that do need to be looked at politically? This is something which we've seen, again, previous governments actually try to gloss over, and now perhaps it is something we need to analyze with some concern.
Yeah, I think the idea of alarm bells really makes sense if you're seeing the whole thing in the context of population control. But if you look at it in terms of family planning, that's, as I should say, is jingle bells, is good news. And I would like all of this data to be interpreted in terms of family planning and not population growth. Once you see it in that context, the questions you've raised make sense. In other words, what is the context where a certain community has a higher TFR for fertility rate than some other community? You mentioned Bengal. There are 10 districts in Assam which have very high fertility rate close to the border. But then there's Kerala, as you mentioned, which is the lowest fertility rate. Pondicherry you haven't mentioned, there it is. And if you look at J&K, which is supposed to be a Muslim majority state, the fertility rate is much lower than Gujarat, Chhattisgarh, and all the Bimaru states put together. So then the idea that we must really plug is, what is population control doing about the fact that when the gap between fertility rates is decreasing between Hindus and Muslims, how can population control make that gap closer in shorter period of time? That is what we should talk about, because otherwise we're talking about population control, which is really, how should I put it, a dictatorial venture, whereas a democratic exercise is family planning. We know, for example, that women in the age group 25 to 49, about 45 to 50% gave birth to the first child before they were 20 years old. We also know that if you have a first child before you're 20 years old, the chances are your IMR will go up, your MMR will go up, and the total number of children will also go up.
Yes.
So now what you need to do, forget about Muslims, Hindus, what you need to do is get to them while they're young. And this should apply to Hindus and Muslims equally. True, Muslims are poorer. True, women, Muslim women above who have 12 years plus education is lower. There's no doubt about it. Muslim women generally want more children than Hindu women do, and yet the gap is closing. The gap is closing. We are doing something right, either in terms of family planning or urbanization is kicking in. And you have, in terms of urban-rural figures, you'll find more Muslims, more urban Muslims proportionately than Hindu Muslims. So the context is all important. The context, if that is centralized, then family planning becomes an important feature. If the context is taken away, then all we're talking about is population growth and population control, and then these alarm bells seem to ring.
In fact, Chandan, Mitra, that's an interesting point. That what are the lessons we're taking away from these figures? Because in that sense, say a poor Hindu and a poor Hindu woman, a poor Muslim woman may have much more in common than say a Muslim woman in New Delhi may have with a Muslim woman in rural Bihar. So when we actually are looking at the breakup, or even when we're talking about it or discussing it through that religious breakup, and I wanted to bring you in on Assam and Bihar, on Assam and West Bengal, because Assam you have an election quite close and it's already become a political issue there. It's perhaps one extreme, because the previous governments, and you had the governor who had warned about this change in demographic profile as well, those warnings weren't heard. Where's the middle way? Where do you think, as a sane political leader, what is the way that the politicians need to draw the lessons now from this?
Well, you see, there are two aspects to it. The population control and what we must do to spread education and so on, and what you just pointed out. In Kerala, for instance, great success. Muslims do not want so many children in Kerala as they seem to want in other parts of the country, and it's a factor of education straight away. So that's one aspect.
So
but let me come to
Muslims or urban young women. I mean, why look at it in Kerala perhaps? You're saying because you want to break it up.
The much better spread of education across the state,
yes,
urban or rural, and Kerala is of course a very largely urbanized state.
No, so Hindu women there also want less children.
Yeah,
say
yeah.
Perhaps,
So
yes.
there is a factor of education which is very strong and very effective. But let me come to the specific context of West Bengal and Assam. Now there alarm bells are caused by a different factor, primarily the infiltration from Bangladesh, and that's been very, very steady for over years, which is what led to the ASU agitation, the Assam Accord, and subsequently also many efforts, the putting up barbed wire fencing along the border. But still, the border districts of Assam and West Bengal have progressively, the Muslim populations in these districts has gone up. In some cases, they have become Muslim majority districts, and as a result, what has happened, and I'm witness to all this both in Assam and West Bengal, that the Hindu population tends to flee these districts and create more space for infiltration.
So you're saying a ghettoized, but though Chandan Mitra, I'd like to point out that in this census it shows that it's actually the areas away from the borders where the Muslim population in Assam has risen quite dramatically. I think 3 districts have now become Muslim majority districts which are away from the border. So infiltration doesn't explain that entirely.
It just keeps spreading. See, first through Dhubri and Karimganj, which are on the border, then obviously there is land gets exhausted, opportunities get exhausted, and the movement is to the interior. So first is the border districts which get affected, and then the rest of the state, and this is what's happened in West Bengal as well. Now there was only one district in West Bengal which was Muslim majority at the time of independence. There are 6 now. So this obviously things are moving into the interior, and what happens in this, as I told you, the Hindu population tends to flee because there is a sense of insecurity that happens when the population demographic ratio changes completely. So this is the real alarm bell, I would say, that these areas in Assam, West Bengal, parts of Bihar, Karimganj and so on, Kishanganj, these are places where I think they are really sitting on a communal tinderbox, and this must be taken into account.
I want to bring General Shah in, and General Shah, perhaps if you can take off a Vice Chancellor hat and bring in your years as a general in the Indian Army. As a former general, interestingly, of course, in the army, these issues have never even come up. You all would not even think of doing a breakup of how many soldiers are Muslim, how many soldiers are Hindu, what their families are, interestingly. But do you think there is a security aspect to this which needs to be addressed? You've had former governors of Assam, General Sinha, making this point, his report brushed under the carpet. Do you think, as a former army person, that this is an issue of national security?
Certainly. I've served many, many years in the Northeast.
Yes.
And there has been a demographic shift, especially in the border areas. It is primarily because of influx from Bangladesh. There is certainly a problem in Assam and in the villages bordering Bengal. But let me tell you that the flow of refugees can never be stopped. I mean, it's happening in all over Europe. Even Israel can't keep out people from going out or coming in. So security measures it certainly impacts on security, but you can't stop the flow of refugees, and nobody has ever succeeded. But the interesting thing is that the population of the rate of growth of Muslims has certainly decreased. I'll show you another graph. Now this shows this is the Hindu graph and this is the Muslim graph. The rate of decline, although they are increasing, the Muslims, but the rate of decline in the rate of growth amongst the Muslim population is much steeper than the rate of the Hindu growth. It is much steeper, the decline. So that's something which we need to take care of and which is not being highlighted. Another thing which I would like to highlight is that if the Muslims continue at this rate of growth, which is of course Malthusian theory says you can't. I mean, there's a certain limit to which the world can take a population, but even if they do, it'll take 200 years. I've brought a graph which shows how it's going to be. It's going to look like this. If we go at this rate of growth, which definitely will not happen, because the rate of growth among the Muslims is falling, and it'll at some level of time, in 30 years time, it'll be the same level as the Hindu rate of growth. But in 2220, they will meet. By that time, the world population will be 30 billion. Can the world afford a population like that? No, it's an impossibility. So these are things, and also let me show you something more interesting.
Yes.
Is if that happens, this is the current Indian population. This is the population of the world. And if we go on by 2220, the Muslims and Hindus will be equal, but look where the graph has gone.